and development and has been a visiting professor at UC Berkeley. Please give a round of applause.
If I may say so, nationalism is a Western concept. We in Asia never had that concept. Even the word Siam was coined by King Rama IV in order to communicate with the Western power, particularly when we opened the country to the West. And for him to remain independent is very important. Before that, our country was known by the name of the capital city, either Ayutthaya for the Siamese, or Hantawadi for the Mon, Anwa for the Burmese. So the name nation state was coined to communicate with the West. But then, when his grandson was educated in this country, later became Rama VI, he coined the word, imitated the British to serve God, King and country. Chart, Sasana, Pramahakasa. The word chart, nation, was used for the first time in the reign of Rama VI, just before the First World War, in order to drill us to serve the king. And the king we all have to serve if we want to be proud of our nation. And of course, you have to be Buddhist. Indeed, the Chinese were regarded as the Jews of the East. That's Rama VI, before First World War. But before Second World War, even worse, when we have people Songkram as the dictator, he changed the name Siam to Thailand. So the Thai were the superior people. And we all have to salute the flag every morning, until now. So nationalism linked directly with dictatorship. Right now we also have dictatorship. And Thailand means that the Thai ethnic people were superior. What about the rest? We have about 20% Malay, Muslim. They regard as second-class citizen. Even now, they still regard as second-class citizen. What about the other ethnic? The Karen, the Kachin, who live in this country long before the Thai came. That's why I feel nationalism could be very, very negative. But it could be positive. To use the Buddhist term, if you use the word nationalism skillfully, I just quote concrete example. Pridi Panomyong, who brought democracy to Siam in 1932, and he was in the same cabinet at Pibun when the Japanese came to occupy our country. They used the pretext that they came, asked our permission to pass through our country, to fight the British in Malaya, the Dutch in Indonesia. People agreed to allow the Japanese to come to occupy our country. And yet people claim nationalism, but Pridi refused. He left the cabinet, but he was too popular, so they made him regent when the king was in Switzerland. As a regent, he organized free Thai movement. I think that nationalism at its best. Free Thai movement means to overthrow the Japanese occupation as well as overthrow people dictatorship. Pridi was the head of the Free Thai movement, and the secretary of the movement จำกัดพลังกูล a student of this country. He went to Oxford. He came back to Siam, and he joined PD, and he volunteered to go underground behind the Chinese, behind the Japanese occupation. He went all the way to China with all difficulties, and he even lost his life there in China. But before he left PD said, he used the Siamese word เพื่อชาติและ humanity นะ for our nation and for humanity. I think the best thing for the nation state must link with humanity. And Samkat went to meet Chiang Kai-shek. At that time, the People government was anti-Chinese, did everything against Chinese interests in the country. Yet Chiang Kai-shek agreed with Samkat that he would respect Siam independence after the war. And not only that, Chiang Kai-shek talked to Roosevelt. Both countries agree for our independence. I think that nationalism at its best when you manage to maintain independence in your country. The British was not so happy because we declare war against the British and the American. The British want to punish us after the war. Despite the fact that people like Puey Ungphakorn, who was still here at LSE, together with others, like our previous speaker's father, joining Seri Thai movement in this country, went back secretly into Siam, linking with the British, with the American, to tell them how to operate together against the Japanese. Even so, the British still wanted to punish us after the Second World War. But people like Puey, Pridi, and so on work for our independence. But not only for our independence, but for humanity. Because at that time, our neighbors were still under the colonial rule. Burma under the British, Indonesia under the Dutch, Philippines under the Americans, Indochina under the French. The Seri Thai movement after the war. We formed the League of Southeast Asian Nations, helping Burma to be independent, helping Indonesia to be independent, helping Laos, Vietnam to be independent. I think that is nationalism at its best. Each nation become independent, but we must join together as a league of Southeast Asian nation. And as a league, this is long before ASEAN. But this league is for independence, for democracy, for socialism, sovereignty, and freedom. Unfortunately, Mr. Pridi was shut out of the country 40 years, despite the fact he brought democracy to the country. He died in Paris. Puey, following Pridi, all his achievements you have heard the two previous speakers. He himself was treated very badly. On 6th of October 40 years ago, he had to leave the country. He came to die in this country. That's what people who serve for humanity, who serve for nationalism at its best, that is, for democracy, for freedom, for human rights. These two characters had to die abroad. Luckily, this year we recognize Puey's 100th anniversary. We celebrated his life, his work, and I hope we will look to him and to Pridi for the base of nationalism, that is, must be for humanity, and for all our nation must be connected equally, respectfully, for basic human rights as well as for the future humanity. Thank you for your attention. ได้ไหมยูเทิร์นนะ
I know. I think they'll call me up.
Our next speaker is Jane Rasbash, who has been heavily involved in international development for nearly 3 decades, supporting Southeast Asian NGOs with a wide range of projects from grassroots leadership to coaching and strategic planning. For the past 8 years, she has been a broad member of Gallia Education, a leading organisation that focuses on education concerning the areas of sustainability. Please give a warm welcome to Jane.
So first I'd like to say thank you, Ajahn. Ajahn Sulak's been my teacher for over 20 years, so it's quite hard for me to stand up and follow that. I feel quite cringy and a day. I can't even understand. And I'm very grateful, Ajahn, for all you taught me. I was quite surprised to be invited to this forum and very honoured. You know, it got me thinking a lot. I work in the sustainability movement and I've worked with some of the NGOs that Ajahn Sulak set up in Thailand over the last 20 years as well in Southeast Asia. So when I thought about it, I thought, I'd spoken to Lalit very briefly about the holistic approach to sustainable development. And I thought, how does this fit with the topic of a nationalistic future? So I thought about nationalism and internationalism a little bit, and then post-nationalism and bioregionalism. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about those topics. So we've heard a lot about nationalism and lots of flags there. And it does have some good qualities. Endorsing allegiance and loyalty to one's country can create unity and shared purpose. It can be a good thing, but it can also lead to separation. Can you hear me all right? I'm just the way I'm walking around here. So it can lead to separation and division and xenophobia. And as we've seen with Brexit, it hasn't been so pleasant whipping up these feelings. Often it's very against anti-migrant policies and very right-wing, as we're seeing a little bit in the UK and in America now. And for me it seems fear-driven. And this quote from Arundhati Roy, nationalism of one kind or another was the cause of most of the genocide in the 20th century. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. And she goes on to say, flags are bits of coloured cloth that governments used first to shrink wrap people's brains and then as ceremonial shrouds to bury the dead. We don't really want that, I don't think. And then internationalism. Yes, the EU was set up after the war to bring countries together. We've heard a bit about that. And it can support political and economic cooperation. And with good intention to have, an effort for peaceful Europe, and to some extent a good success. So a lot to learn from that. I was working with migrant workers from Burma in Thailand in one of Sulak's organisations for about 10 years. And the migrant workers from Burma were really badly treated, not really accepted. And it was kind of two-way process. Both sides distrusted each other. And when ASEAN, the Association for Southeast Asian Cooperation, opened up in 2015, our project was quite surprised because there was a doorway then. There was a doorway in to talk with the local authorities about human rights, about what they're... I'm not saying that there was huge changes, but there was a way in because this international agenda had opened a door to at least raise awareness of human rights and what this means if you have this kind of international cooperation. And then there's the United Nations. these other sorts of big organisations which have a big agenda for sustainable development goals, which is addressing all countries signing up to address these issues of climate change we have. So it's a really, a good ideal. However, as we know, they can be very top-down and bureaucratic. So maybe there is this huge gap in between policy and applying what's the policy, and so there's a lot of problems with that. And the quote I put here is Martin Luther King. Our loyalties must transcend our race, our tribe, our class, our nation. And this means we must develop a world perspective. So there's definitely something really important about this kind of internationalism. I'd like to talk a little bit about what I'm calling post-nationalism. I live in Scotland, and I was really surprised in the Yes Scotland, the referendum. When I first went to Scotland many years ago, the Scottish Nationalist Party, it was quite a nationalistic agenda. It was definitely, oh, you're English, it was kind of very much nationalist. However, I noticed in the referendum that the Green Party were supporting the Yes agenda. And when I heard that the Green Party were, I thought, oh, that's really interesting, because my values are green values. And I thought, how come that is? And I kind of realised then that there was a lot of other groups that were there was Asian Yes, LGBT Yes, there was lots of different diverse groups. It was about where Scottish people became, for the first time I felt Scottish because I lived there. You were included if you lived there. It was about where people lived and diversity rather than ethnicity. And that to me was a huge, huge shift and very different from what I saw in the Brexit vote. The whole rhetoric around that. And I notice in Canada as well, there's this kind of post-nationalist approach too, which is very inclusive and very inclusive. So it's building on shared values, and for me it's focusing on hope rather than fear. And when you look at the Scottish, the SNP agenda, and the Canadian one, it's relatively, they have green and peaceful agendas, no trident, hopeful. However, of course, this can be quite idealistic and, maybe not able to walk the talk. But for me, this is kind of much more hopeful than the other types of nationalism. And I just want to say one other thing about bioregionalism. Bioregionalism is an approach that focuses on natural boundaries rather than nation states. And I'd like to give one example in Burma of a project I'm a bit involved in. The Irrawaddy River, from the top to the bottom. In Myitkyina, in Myitsone Dam, there's a big Chinese-funded dam at the top of the river that's currently on moratorium. And the reason it went on moratorium was I think it was about 2011.